Hey, everybody, this is Paul Molinari from Popcorn, and we have got a really cool show today because it's something a little bit different. The topic of today's conversation is about chaos to cohesion, specifically organizational design. And organizational design, you say, why is that relevant to restaurant technology? Well, because it's kind of like everything. The way that your company is structured, how you systematically approach improving an organization's effectiveness, their culture, the company's capacity to adapt, right? So organizational design, like think of it as like incorporating equal parts psychology, business strategy, change management. All of these things are put into a methodology that helps align people, align processes, and align performance. So today I have a guest, really fascinating guy. His name is Jasper Nelissen. Not only is he a longtime University of Miami lecturer, adjunct professor, and curriculum developer, but he's also the founder of NCG Consulting and also the co-founder of Multi, which is an agency for organizational growth. So, without further ado, Jasper Nelissen, welcome to the show, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. It's great to be here, and thanks for that wonderful introduction. I couldn't have said it better myself, to be honest.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. I've always been fascinated by organizational design. I remember way back in the day taking one of the few college classes that I remember really fondly was a class they taught in business school at Northeastern called managerial organizational behavior. And I remember distinctly they one of the parts of the class, they actually had us watch an old Henry Fonda movie called 12 Angry Men. And I don't know if you know anything about it, but it's basically this movie that I think was shot in the 50s, and it's about 12 jurors, and they're all arguing. I think it was a murder case. And they got into this concept of groupthink, right? And how one person can persuade an entire room and everybody starts thinking the same way, and it's hard to break out of that. So anyway, quick I've so this is something that's always stuck with me, like the psychology of it all.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm one of those guys that both loves structure, but
Yeah.
also a little bit of chaos. And what has always attracted me to this kind of field um, is people, the impact that change has on people, but also how you can use and work with people in your organization or your company or whatever to make change really stick, right? And
Yeah.
organizational development and change management, alignment really provides a handle for that. And I've seen many times where change goes wrong, that the impact on those who are affected is incredible. Um, Impact in terms of satisfaction at the workplace, the way you collaborate, the way you communicate, effectiveness as a team or as individuals. And that has always been this fascinating aspect for me, and making sure that by helping organizations go through these kind of situations through change, whether it's positive or negative change, right?
Yeah.
Um, at least I can bring a little bit of structure to the chaos.
That's right. And it's very often that an organization will perceive change as chaos.
Yeah.
Here it is, and that change can come about a myriad different ways. It could come from a new leader, a new CEO that wants to implement a new vision, hell, a new CMO that wants a new website, right? Part and parcel of the new CMO experience. Um, so describe for me this how organizational development specifically, how do we'll call it OD, organizational development. How why should the restaurant sector care about this? And maybe you can describe an overview.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think having had some experience in hospitality, in restaurants, bars, and so forth, I think there's two things here that are important. Number one, change these days very often is driven by technology, right? The implementation of technology in whatever way in organizations brings about change wholesale, whether that's an HR platform or a CRM platform, or in this case, restaurant tech, POS, or otherwise. The implementation of that brings about change in many facets, be it processes and ways of working, be it how people collaborate in a team, be it how the relationship between personnel in a restaurant and the guests occur. I think that's one thing that is important to see. And I think the other thing here is a restaurant is a microcosm in that sense, with
Yeah.
multiple stakeholders interacting and with multiple processes, back of house, front of house, working at the same time. So I think in that microcosm, the implementation of tech and therefore the change required to do that effectively brings about a lot of focus on that on organization development and do it in the right way.
So it's funny when you think about um, restaurant technology and the impact that it has across the organization on the enterprise level. Very often, when a restaurant is implementing either a big ERP system or a big bit of technology that will impact operations and really kind of touch everybody across the organization, how smart is it to, or rather, let me rephrase that. How important would you say it is to have sort of like a professional that can help oversee that implementation and rollout so it's done properly? So often you see restaurant tech, great solutions, but can't quite get it over the hump because they're relying so often on implementation teams that might not necessarily have the steps really nailed down.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's incredibly important. And I think as a restaurant technology company, that has to be one of the, the facets, one of the offerings you bring uh, in conjunction with the great technology that you're implementing.
Yeah.
I think a couple of things important. I think number one, planning out that change holistically is incredibly important. If the focus is only on the implementation, the SEC implementation of the technology solution, you're going to miss a lot of aspects around that solution that have to be managed in conjunction to make it effective, to make it stick, as you say.
Right.
I think the second thing that is needed is a very keen understanding of the stakeholders involved, of managing change through people. In the end, technology is only technology. It is how people use it and what value it brings them, whatever role you have within that technology solution, that makes it work. So, implementing, and this happens a lot beyond restaurants, obviously, implementing a solution straightforward as let's plug and play and see whatever happens
Yeah.
is never the best way to go, because that is going to lead to resistance, is going to lead to misusage, or sometimes just straight up refusal.
Refusal. And that's where we get to the dreaded shelfware um, scenario, which every tech company loathes and fears immensely. You do not want to be put on the shelf. You want engagement,
Yeah.
right? So, in some ways, you can think of this an organizational development professional, somebody that's truly schooled in the steps and the frameworks, is almost, I don't want to call it, maybe I wouldn't call it insurance. I would call it hedging your bets that the investment that you're making in this technology is not only rolled out properly, but will facilitate as much engagement as you can get, right?
Yeah, because in the end, what people do with your solution is where the true value lies. And as a technology provider, that is where you want to have a focus, because loyalty is built in the end,
Yes.
in terms of usage of results and so forth. But it starts with the implementation. It starts with understanding how a technology solution is going to be used and what the impact of that usage is, that change on those around it, every stakeholder. And managing that, having that front and center
Yeah.
when you start the implementation process, I think is incredibly important.
I like that. I like kind of starting here because I want the audience to really understand, okay, organizational development, change management. These are all things that almost they feel very academic in a way. But in reality, without without utilizing these or without incorporating the principles of these things into what you're selling, um, it kind of behooves you not to include these things into your solution, because what the customer, in this case the restaurant brand, frankly is most fearful of is lack of use and lack of resistance, as you mentioned.
Yeah, and that's understandable. I think it's only human nature that most people find change in whatever way at least a little bit fearful, right?
Yeah.
At least a little bit, get a little bit nervous about that. Things run in a certain way. We've always done it this way. I've been at this restaurant for 10 years, and this is how we take orders. This is how we communicate with the back of the house. This is how we run our inventory system and so forth. So when a new solution comes, whatever the use case is, right?
Right.
That kind of resistance is already a little bit there. It's already there in people's minds as in, what is it going to mean for me, right?
Yeah.
So when you implement these things as a tech company or as an organizational change manager or as the restaurant owner, if you will, starting with that mindset, thinking through the full scenario is incredibly important. And what it will do in the end is it'll enable you to take those who are going to be most affected by that change, mainly, I guess, your personnel or people
Yeah.
who run your business, take them on a journey and ensure that you can articulate from the get-go that this is the use case, the burning platform, if you will. This is how we're going to go about implementing this. But importantly, this is how it's going to help you.
Yeah. I love that. So describe for me how um what is the methodology? What does change management mean? I mean, how you bring change management to organization. What does that look like visually? Is there a chart, or is there a roadmap of some sort?
Well, there is. And so with change, the management of it is obviously specific to certain situations. But in generally speaking, what you can see is number one, as I mentioned earlier, there is always a use case or a burning platform or a reason to go into change. And I'll talk a little bit broader than the restaurant industry at this point, but that use case or that burning platform could either be something very positive, as in we're growing or we're adding new business or we have a new client or we're
Right.
adding a couple of restaurants, if you will, right? It could also sometimes come from distress, as in the business is shrinking or there's a new competitor that's come around that we have to answer to, or as you mentioned earlier, a new leader in the organization
Yep.
that wants to do things differently, right? So I think step number one is acknowledging why change is happening or why change is necessary. That's number one. Having that clear is incredibly important, because it steers all the activity going forward, right? Step number two then is a thorough analysis of the situation, of the context. What is going on? What are the drivers of change? What are roadblocks that we can see that might impede change? What are opportunities that we can capitalize on? And in that case, importantly, who are the people or the stakeholders involved in that change and what are their roles? Beyond roles, you want to also understand what their kind of perception of that change is.
Right.
Are they people that detract from it, that say, you know what, this is not for me, I don't want that change? Are they people that are neutral, that say, you know what, it happens, I'll see where we go? Or are there people that say, you know what, I really support this, is important, I want to have an active role in it, promote it, right? So that's step number two, analysis. Step number three, then, thorough planning. This is where structure comes into the chaos, if you will, where you set out to say, you know what, if this is where we want to be in X amount of time, whether that is the implementation of a new tech system, whether that is an organizational restructuring, whether it is a change in ways of working, you plan from endpoint to starting point. What are the steps we need to take? What are the activities that need to happen, and how do they get us to where we need to be? That plan is set out both structurally, as in what needs to happen, but also, again, in terms of the people involved. When do we inform? When do we consult? When do we have an activity around this change where people can participate, and who's responsible for driving what?
Okay.
And then obviously the last step is making sure that you measure project process, that you have KPIs, that you have,
At this
your
point, you're
measurement.
also agreeing on what are the KPIs?
Of
What does
course, yes.
success look like? Right.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that's a rudimentary process. And whether change is small or big, these
Yeah.
steps will always follow.
And I would imagine you would recommend you don't want to necessarily put the wheels on the bus while it's in motion. You probably want to have those types of meetings and conversations before
Yeah.
the rollout happens. And I don't think it's not this what you just described to me is not necessarily a forum for the company to come together to determine, do we want to do this? I mean, I'm assuming that somebody somewhere has already made the decision that we're going to do this.
Yeah, and of course, I think if change comes up organically, that's fine, but it still needs structure, right? So there still always has to be a moment where
Yeah.
someone or someone's together say, this is good for this company or it's necessary, so let's engage in that process. So um, change is to a certain degree democratic because a lot of people have to have
Right.
input in it and have to have buy-in, if you will. But on the other hand, there's a little bit of leadership required, more than a
Right.
little bit, to say, and this is now where we're going, we're going to go about it.
This is where we're going and this is also our opportunity to do this the right way.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, I like that. And yeah, so that's good. I think that it reminds me of, as I'm oft to remind the audience, I worked at crunch time for 9 years or whatever, and that was and here's the thing, and why is that relevant in this scenario? Well, because the technology that my old company would try to implement across an enterprise, and usually these restaurants could be hundreds of locations, they could be thousands of locations. It's a big honking deal. It touches everybody. And so there's a certain amount of delicacy and, frankly, fragility to the entire implementation process. And one of the things that I think my former company did very well, and much more so than its competitors, was its seriousness in its approach to that change management. They understood, as did the client, the customer, the restaurant brand, that in order to get this thing through, it's going to take a real level of seriousness to birth this thing across an
yeah.
organization. And so that's where I think restaurant technology companies can really separate themselves from the pack, right? Bringing that level of expertise and commitment to change and to helping their clients do this the right way. Can you, Jasper, I'm wondering, are there any, and not to put you completely on the spot here, but I'm wondering, are there any companies that you can think of, whether it be in the restaurant space or otherwise, that do a really good job of implementing new ideas and change and have figured out a way to do it very highly methodically with great success?
Well, it's an interesting question. And obviously, there's great firms out there that specialize in this, as I do, large and small consulting firms, change management firms, and so forth. What I find perhaps a more interesting way to answer that is what I've always loved about change is that there's a huge cultural aspect to it as well,
Yeah.
right? And I find companies that are on the verge of culture usually much more adapt to understanding what is important to people and what
Mm.
people feel and how people would want to work. So companies in music, for instance, companies in advertising, companies that do branding, companies in fashion, and so forth, usually have the ability to spot what is important to people intuitively much quicker than perhaps a more structured, consulting focused organization.
Right.
So I think those organizations that combine the feeling for people
Mhm.
with the structural approach to processes and projects like these are the ones who will always win out. And bringing it all the way back to my practice, we find in multi, um, we call ourselves the agency for growth.
Mhm.
And we understand growth in that way. Growth is not only going through change processes and ensuring that um, from an initiation to a completion, something is managed really well. Right? It is also about people understanding again what drives people, um, how they interact, what they feel, what's important to them. Brand plays a big role in that. So
Right.
long-winded answer, but those organizations that have EQ and the IQ together,
Yeah.
those are the ones that will win in change any day.
Yeah. And I think that's a good segue to where I want to go next, and that's leadership, right? So describe for me the leadership qualities that are required to have that kind of influence over the organization to accept this change management and yeah, and being able to to push that through. What are we looking for in our
Yeah,
leaders?
I'll start where I ended in our previous part, which is to have a really feeling, be in tune with the people that work for you or with you. As a leader, you have to feel how change ready an organization is. And the only way you can do that is by understanding what's going on in the minds and the hearts of the people that you work with and for. I think that's number one. I
Yeah.
think number two, successful change really depends on clarity. We talk about chaos and we talk about structure and all that, but clarity within that is incredibly important. Even the clarity that tells you that we're in chaos or that things aren't going well. So
Right.
clarity of purpose, clarity of need, and clarity in terms of line of sight of where we're going is another aspect that I think leaders need to bring to these kind of situations. And then lastly, and there's many other things, but this one is important. A commitment to it. Very often, change efforts fail because there isn't the right commitment from a leadership perspective to see it through. I say very often to people I help implement change, you already have a day job. This change now comes very often on top of it, right? There is a burden that is put on the organization, and burden sounds negative, but you get my point here. A burden that's put on the organization to do something that goes beyond what you do on a day-to-day basis. It is the leader, the manager in the organization that will have to steer that and will have to have commitment to it to see it through, even when things get rough or when change is not understood or where people say,
Right.
you know what, why do we need this in the first place? So feeling with people, clear line of sight and commitment.
Does the leader have to be the CEO, or can the leader be simply a champion of a project? I mean, right? So we have to look at each other, right? It's not necessarily on the most senior person in the room.
No, not at all. And I think a senior person or the most senior person, depending
Yeah.
on the organization, does need to have the power of sign off, of approval, probably initiation as well. But it doesn't have to be the person that does the work, if you will.
Yeah.
There could be another person responsible for seeing the project through, working through organizational change, or with a person like myself. And it really depends on what the change is. For instance, if there's a change in brand, it would likely be a CMO or marketing director. If it's a change in ways of working, it might be an operations person. If it's a change in personnel or setup of the organization, it might be a more HR focused person. So it
Right.
doesn't have to be the, the top dog, if you will. Although, if that change starts, it has to be carried and agreed to by all leaders in the organization.
But here's the catch, too. I think. I think. Tell me if I'm wrong. it's one thing to have the champion and the leader that possesses I think the qualities to get people enthusiastic. Let's just say enthusiastic about this new burden in their lives. But they also need to be, this is where I think someone like you comes in to help that person in that role. Because it's very often, certainly the most successful people at the most successful companies may be practiced at this. But that's not necessarily the case, particularly in our industry where, let's face it, a lot of people wear a lot of different hats, and you might not have the same level of even budget. This costs money, all of it.
Yeah.
So working with the professional to help to coach, I mean, is that the role of someone like you? Are you also like are you over, would you recommend somebody coming in and overseeing all of this, or is it better to be the coach that guides the champion through the process?
I think it's a bit of both, to be honest. And again, it's dependent on the type of change. But bringing a person in like myself to help with this has a couple of advantages. Number one, it is my job to help you. That is my time and my effort put in that you then, as a leader or as a change leader, don't have to put in.
Right.
You can put that into your day job, which is a good thing, right? I think the second thing that's important is when you get to when the rubber meets the road on change and you get to those sticky situations where there might be some conflict or disagreement or whatever, it often is helpful to have a third party in the room that isn't necessarily working for the restaurant group or for the hospitality company that can
Right.
solve these kind of situations. And I think, thirdly, by experience and by this being the thing I do, um, that comes with experience of previous situations. You might see pitfalls or opportunities that someone who's in the trenches, who's running a restaurant, doesn't necessarily see, and that's okay. That's not their job. So there's advantages to it for sure. That said, change can never be implemented by a person like me alone. It needs the organization. It needs the stakeholders because those are the people who are going to live through that change in the end.
Right. So ultimately, it's like we all kind of learn at some point, you need that executive sponsor.
Yeah,
Somebody somewhere up the chain has to give it the sign of the cross, right? And
yeah,
be like, this is what we're doing, kids. And and we even made sure that we're going to do this the right way because we hired a professional, or we gave the person that's on our team, we gave them specific training to help them
yeah.
get through this, right?
And I like that term you use, coach.
Yeah,
It's a good thing. And I coach flag football, just to
sure.
put in a little reference point here. Sure, I call some plays and stuff like that, but in the end, it's about enabling the team on the field to go through the plays and do the thing that they're best at, right? And I liken it to that. Every change program has these people on the field that have to go through it and have to do things differently or in a
Right.
different way. And coaching them to do that is a big part of the job. It is about giving confidence. It's about giving guidelines. It's about giving ways of working that allow people to collaborate and communicate towards an end goal. So I like that term. That's
No,
good.
good. I'll let you use it.
Thank you.
Oh, good. Well, here's the thing. I'm always one to say that restaurant is a team sport. I mean, that's the reality of it. And whether it be literally inside of the store where everybody knows their roles to at HQ, everybody is, you kind of can liken it almost to an NBA or an NFL organization where there's the home office, there are the players, everybody has jobs that they got to do.
Yeah.
Um, but everybody can always improve. And I think organizations should always do more to provide the training necessary to make the company better. I want to leave on, or I want to cover one more thing before we put a cap on this as we come up on time. But where do you see or do you see any emerging trends in this organizational development? I mean, are there is there particular software or things or tools that are used that companies can work with?
Yeah, so trends wise, I think there's a couple of apparent things, right? I think number one, continued focus on people, that human centric approach
Yep.
is incredibly important. And in our day and age, that is also what people expect. I mean, there's this principle in change management that I love. I use a lot. It's the three things, right? Where are we going? How do we get there? And then thirdly, what's in it for me? And that last one puts the onus squarely on that element that we started with, which is the understanding of people and the understanding of their,
Okay.
their value. I think that's number one. I think number two, open door, but use of data, AI, the interpretation of data and knowledge aids organizational change in many ways. And I think that's a great connection to the restaurant tech that is very data driven, that has an abundance of data. I think if we have smart ways to understand from an institutional structural perspective how restaurants work, where pain points are, what moments are that really matter in in the implementation of restaurant tech or otherwise, I think that aids change and organization development, and that will only become more
I,
apparent.
I absolutely agree. I think that there's use now for AI to be really prescriptive to to help us solve the problems that are might be right in front of our face, but just need that extra added bit of clarity that AI
Yeah,
does so well that can just distill everything down into the summary of what, and then of course the recommendation, given all the right parameters.
yeah.
This has been awesome, Jasper. I want to leave on two things. Number one, what advice would you offer a restaurant tech entrepreneur aimed at enhancing their ability to help the companies that they work with better implement their technologies?
Yeah, I think my key advice, and I trust that a lot of restaurant tech entrepreneurs do this and know this, but just to belabor the point, don't see your technology only as a structural or organizational enabler. What it really is an enabler of people.
Yeah,
I think that the amazing thing about technology is that it allows us to do things in a different way, in a smarter way, in a faster way, whatever. The impact is on the people. So if that becomes the starting point of how you market, implement your technology, then that is a huge step forward already to having that technology embraced by the people that are going to work with it and therefore make organizations and their people work better. I think that is the key message. And doing that requires a couple of soft skills, a couple of more technology based skills, but that package together, I think, leads to success.
beautiful. Jasper Nelissen, professor, University of Miami, founder of NCG Group, co-founder of Multi Agency. Where can people find you?
Listen, go to our website, multi-theagency.com. That's the easiest way. Obviously, you can find my contact details on LinkedIn as well and on our website. We're open for conversations. We'd love to talk about change, about brand, about how we can help grow organizations inward and outward. So I look forward to it. Look us up.
Absolutely. And I will say this as a friend of popcorn, um, really looking forward to working with you and helping Popcorn's clients and the many restaurant brands that they support with change management, organizational design, and development. I can say very proudly, I know a guy. I got a guy. I got a guy. He's out in Miami. Smart as hell. Awesome. You're going to love him.
Big
Jasper, it's been great, man.
great. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for doing this.
Thank you.